Some cases never die. This one waits right outside Holmes's door. Welcome to Fog Casebook. I am your host, Vela. Drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from tonight? Your presence makes this mystery alive. It was one of those London mornings when the fog seems to have been poured into the streets as a liquid and then left to congeal. The lamps along Baker Street were reduced to faint, jaundiced buttons. The passing of a cab was announced not by sight, but by the soft pat of hooves and the sudden loom of a blacker darkness in the vapour. Holmes had set his chemistry set upon the breakfast table and, much to Mrs. Hudson's dismay, was reducing a ribbon of India rubber in a porcelain spoon over the spirit lamp, timing the vapours by his watch and noting their effect upon a caged housefly. "Observe, Watson," said he, without looking up, "how the creature's agitation spikes not when smoke is at its densest, but at its lightest. The world is deceived by volume. Truth is often lighter than it appears." "I am more taken with the effect upon my eggs," I returned. "You are conducting an inquest upon the poor insect's nerves while committing a felony upon my appetite." He smiled in that brief, inward way of his. "An unpardonable trespass, but we must be at leisure while the city makes itself invisible. Fog is an honest conspirator. It covers the guilty and delays the incompetent." We were interrupted by a sudden, energetic hammering upon our door, a series of blows so sharp and orderly that Holmes's brows rose a fraction. "A trained wrist," he murmured. "Military or police. The hand is ungloved. Hear the knuckles. The messenger has run. Listen to the breath in the pause. So the errand is urgent." Mrs. Hudson admitted Inspector Lestrade, his neat figure beaded with moisture, his hat cradled like a delicate patient. He brought with him the smell of damp wool and the peculiar flavour of the street, wet leather, coal smoke, and something sharper that I could not at once place. "Mr. Holmes," said he, "I beg your immediate attention. There's a dead man in a hansom cab not 50 yards from your door." Holmes put down his spoon and closed the watch with a delicate click. "You have chosen an enviably short walk, Inspector. Pray sit. No? Then the case is not merely near, but pressing. Tell me only what you fear to forget. We shall gather the rest upon the pavement." Lestrade, whose composure seldom deserted him, had the air of a man more nettled than shocked. Driver claims he left his fare at the corner by the chemist's for a moment's purchase, and returned to find him slumped. We pulled the man down. He's quite dead. No wound, no smell of laudanum or gin, and there's this. He gingerly produced a folded slip of paper, already dampened by the fog. Holmes received it as if it were a moth's wing. Across the paper, which proved to be the torn lower half of a theatre bill, there had been scrawled in a cramped, forceful hand, "Ants Baker." The tear had removed the words before and after, but the fragment read, unmistakably, "Ants Baker." "Haunts Baker, Inspector," said Holmes, holding the bill to the lamp. "Or perhaps wants Baker." He tapped it with a long forefinger. "Ink not yet 24 hours old. Written with a steel nib of indifferent quality, note the scratch in the downstrokes, and in a moving conveyance, to judge by the tremor in the tails. A message intended for me, or a theatrical advertisement that chance has shortened into a prophecy?" Lestrade's mouth made a line. "If it is an advertisement, it is a monstrous coincidence. The cab was stopped outside your very lodgings." Holmes's nostrils flared slightly. "Not outside by design, I think. The driver would prefer a place of light, and the lamps along the chemist's corner are fixed higher than most. It is a common habit with drivers to draw up near there in a fog. Still—" He lifted his chin, and I recognized the moment when his mind slips its leash. "Come, Watson, we shall be less blind in the fog than in speculation." Out in the street, the fog worked its familiar magic of intimacy and confusion. Sounds were close yet without origin, shapes advanced like confidences. We had not far to go. A small knot of people had gathered around a hansom, the horse shivering and stamping as if affronted by the weather. Lestrade's sergeant held them back with that mixture of apology and iron which London policemen manage better than any in the world. The dead man had been set upon the curb, his back against the wheel. He was between 40 and 50, of middling height and sound frame, plainly but respectably dressed, a dark sack coat, grey trousers, and boots well polished but not new. His hair was sandy and thinning, his face pale, and his jaw slightly dropped, giving him, in death, an expression of weak surprise. I knelt at once and examined him while Holmes remained a pace off, not from squeamishness, but to see the whole before descending into the parts. "There is no wound," said I after a moment, "no sign of vomiting, no constriction of the pupils. The lips are faintly blue, the hands—" I took one up. "Cold, but not stiff. Death within the hour, perhaps within the half. There is a faint odour." "Carbolic," said Holmes softly. "Not applied to the man, but to something recently near him. See where the wool at his cuff is slightly singed? A drop of acid will bite and then evaporate. Carbolic persuades a clumsy hand to cleanliness. Continue, Watson." I turned the man's head and noted beneath the left ear a delicate bruise, circular as if made by a coin. "This mark is recent. There's no blood, but the skin is abraded." Holmes crouched then, his eyes travelling over the dead man as a hawk's shadow travels over a field. "He wears no wedding ring, but the skin at the base of his left ring finger is paler. He removed it recently, or often removes it. His boots show a line of white dust in the welt, a chalk or soft stone, while the sole carries a smear of something blue, as if he had trodden in paint. His watch is of modest value, and the chain is stamped by a cheap jeweller in Birmingham. The ticket in his waistcoat pocket, a pawn ticket issued last night in Marylebone Road. Note the time, 8:30. What had he to pawn at 8:30, and to reclaim with such haste this morning that he could spare only a moment's purchase? Lestrade had the pawn ticket at once. For a silver locket, no description of the contents. "The contents are not the locket's business," said Holmes, "any more than the driver's business is what his passenger carries." He rose and stepped to the cab. The interior smelled of damp leather, smoke, and the sharp shade of the chemist's shop that the inspector had brought in with his coat. On the seat was a small circular scorch no wider than a shilling. Holmes's long fingers hovered over it, but did not touch. Beneath the opposite cushion he drew forth the other half of the theatre bill, neatly folded and quite clean. "Drury Lane," he read. "Last night's performance of The Blue Sailor. A melodrama of small pretensions and great volume, if memory serves. And here?" He tapped the printer's line. "The bill from which our message was torn. The halves were folded separately. The man, or someone, kept them apart after the tier. Curious economy." While Holmes examined the cab, I had the man's pockets searched by the sergeant under Lestrade's eye. We found a small empty file bearing no label, a handkerchief of good linen marked with the initials R.E., 3 shillings and some pence, the pawn ticket, and, at the very bottom of the right-hand pocket, a scrap of paper that might have been overlooked, but for a faint, gritty feel, like a sanded card. On it, in pencil, someone had drawn a rectangle with a diagonal line, and at one corner a tiny cross. The drawing was very small, not more than the size of a thumb joint, but remarkably precise. Holmes took it from my hand without comment, and slipped it into his own. "Inspector, the driver?" A man with a red face and anxious eyes stepped forward, twisting his cap. "Name Kellett, sir?" Took the gent up at the corner of Portman Square near 9:30. He told me to drive slow, what with the fog. Stops me here, says he wants a bottle from the chemist's, carbolic was mentioned, if you please, and leaves me a shilling for my trouble. He don't come back. I looks in and, well, you've seen him. You heard nothing? Asked Holmes. No cough, no cry, no movement from within the cab? Nary a sound, sir, save the horse and the bells. Holmes's gaze flicked to the horse's harness and then to the iron curb where the wheel rested. And you stood where? Kellett pointed and Holmes nodded, as if the position of a cabman's boots were the last piece of a child's entertainment. You did well to fetch Inspector Lestrade, said Holmes. Lestrade bristled slightly. And what do you make of it, Mr. Holmes? I make of it a man who sought last night the relief of ready money and this morning the aid of antiseptic. He had been near a place where blue pigment is used in quantity and chalk in dust. He carried, at some point, a small heated instrument, perhaps not he himself, but near enough to scorch his sleeve and mark the cab's cushion, and he had business urgent enough to bring him as near to my door as a cautious driver draws in a fog. He intended to write that something haunts Baker, or wants Baker. And then, somewhere between the chemist's threshold and the hansom's seat, death put its finger beneath his ear. Lestrade's eyes had narrowed. Poison? Possibly, but a subtle one, and administered not in the cab. The bruise is too suggestive of contact with a narrow object, metallic, I should say, cooled by air and yet hot enough to blister wool. He glanced at me. You observed the shape. A coin would not bruise so cleanly. A ring might, if it bore a boss beneath the jewel, but our man wore none. Holmes's gaze had drifted to the chemist's shop, its window a pale smear in the fog. There are two avenues by which death enters unnoticed, the one through the stomach and the other through the skin. The latter is the more elegant. Come, Watson, the inspector will keep our friend from being improved by curious fingers. We will begin with the living. And where shall I begin? Asked Lestrade. Holmes's expression warmed by a degree. At respectable distances. Have the driver held, make inquiries at Portman Square, and send a man to Marylebone Road for the description of the pawned locket and the name upon the pledge. Also acquire, if you please, a list of patrons who occupied private boxes at Drury Lane last night for the Blue Sailor. Stage melodrama breeds quiet intrigues, and quiet intrigues stamp their boots in blue dust. Lestrade, accustomed to these imperious catalogues, made a brisk note and turned away. Holmes slipped the fragment of the pencil drawing into his cigarette case and handed me my hat. As we moved toward the chemist's threshold, the fog thinned for a moment, and I saw the hansom, the small cluster of faces, and the pale oval of the dead man's cheek, as in a dim lantern slide. Holmes, said I, you spoke of the message as a prophecy. Did I? Then I retract the poetry and keep the fact. A man writes to haunts Baker, and dies within a whisper of Baker Street. The city furnishes many kinds of irony. The rarest is the sincere coincidence. Let us see whether this fog hides a ghost or a hand. He pushed open the chemist's door, and the bell above it gave a chime as neat and bright as a knife. The bell's chime had scarcely ceased when a thin, pale man emerged from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a towel. The shop smelt of spirits and soap. Labelled jars stood like a regiment behind glass. Holmes let his glance travel once and fixed it upon the chemist with an affable bow. Within the half hour, said he, a sandy-haired gentleman bought carbolic acid, small quantity, and lint. He paid in haste and kept the door open. The chemist nodded. Yes, sir, I warned him of the strength. He trembled, counting his coins. Mention injury? No, He asked if I sold bluing. For laundry, I ventured. For costumiers more often, the man replied. I sent him to Sadler's by the pawnbroker's alley. They keep Prussian blue in powder. Holmes slipped a card across. Sherlock Holmes, your sales book, if you please. His finger ran down the columns and halted. There, 10 minutes before a corpse addressed my pavement. The bottle was corked, with a penny stopper and paper. Holmes' eye caught on the doorbell's leather strap, where a glossed speck clung. He teased free a grain of blackened wool. A heated metal brushed here, not our sandy gentleman whose purchase was wrapped, someone close behind. His spirit lamp? I suggested. Too clean a scorch, a narrow metal warmed in a blue flame. He looked to me. The mark under the ear, a flat circle, coin size, picture a little wheel pressed. The chemist added. 5 minutes later came another caller, better dressed. He would not step fully in, held the door with his foot, bought a dropper bottle and Castile soap. His nails were rimed with blue dust as from paint. Holmes stooped to the sill and coaxed from a crack a dull blue crumb, sealing it in an envelope. Coarse pigment, not a costume as fine. Our second man carries the theatre on his fingers. Outside the fog thinned. Holmes walked quickly, his head bent. Order the facts, Watson. Blue dust, rough, chalk in the welt, a question for bluing, a theatre bill torn, halves kept apart, a pawned locket at 8:30, carbolic and lint, a follower with a dropper and a heated tool, and death stamped beneath the ear. What craft owns chalk lines, blue powder, quick heat, and haste? Stage carpentry, said I, or billiards. The club's chalk is fine, the carpenter's coarse. Add our pencil scrap, an oblong crossed by a line and a little cross in the corner, a floor with brace and hinge, a trap, to the stage door of Drury Lane. Behind the theatre, the street had its own industry, boys with pots, men shouldering flats, a fellow trundling rolled canvas. A foreman regarded us sourly until Holmes made a sovereign glint. We were admitted to a draughty space where scenery rose like cliffs and the boards were scribbled with chalk. Holmes's gaze steadied upon a rectangle in white, a diagonal across it, and in the near angle, a tiny penciled cross. He knelt, touched the line, and lifted his forefinger blue. The drawing, fresh marks, pigment of the coarsest grind. A man in shirt sleeves called from a trestle. Mind the trap, sir. Carpenter's measure for tonight. Which scene stands upon it when the blue sailor plays? Holmes asked. The docks at Deptford, said he. We raise a capstan head from below, blue for water, chalk for deck lines. If it's paint you want, Mr. Venn will tell you. Holmes led me to a narrow stair, the air sharp with turpentine. A bearded fellow turned from a board mottled with sea colour. Mr. Venn, said Holmes, you had this morning a visitor who asked for bluing. 3 visitors, Venn returned. One Sandy knew the stuff by sight, not by name. I told him we don't retail. Clerkish, flurried, left a smudge on my stair there. A blue half-footprint stained a rung. Second, gent in a muffler, wanted to know who'd been asking. Kept a hand in his pocket. Smelt of soap. Third, a lady with a veil, looked in and vanished. Holmes scraped a few grains from the stair into his envelope, then studied where the blue deepened at the tread's edge. Note the compression where a man paused to turn. Our sandy friend hesitated, going down. He knew the way up already. You think he had been backstage last night? I said. Undoubtedly. The half-bill is not picked by babes in the pit. He had business among these flats and traps, business for which money failed him till he pawned a locket. He came at morning with antiseptic and was shadowed by a man with a dropper and a warmed tool. A poison through the skin, I whispered. One that profits from a small, clean puncture. The coin bruise is the print of a rim that steadies the touch. He glanced toward the fly loft, where ropes hung like a web. Our follower would choose a stair or doorway, brief privacy, a quick press, and gone. A bell sounded on the stage. Holmes' eye had the far look that means a net is knitting behind his brow. "We want names," he said. "Who wore a muffler last night? Who dealt with a clerk who now lies dead? What did the locket contain that could purchase silence and invite murder?" "You would see the company list," I asked. "I would see the master of properties," he said, moving. "The man who lends heat to metal, chalk to floor, and secrecy to scenes now." The master of properties proved to be a stout, genial fellow with a bald crown and spectacles perched low on his nose. He sat at a workbench, littered with coils of wire, brass fittings, and a small spirit lamp, whose blue tongue quivered faintly even in the draught of the stage. Holmes's eyes rested on that lamp a moment longer than courtesy demanded, before he inclined his head. "You are Mr. Clegg, I think?" he said. "That I am," replied the man, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's broken swords, pistols that smoke, or trap-doors that spring like clockwork, I'm the fellow you'll want. What can I do for you, sir?" Holmes stepped nearer, examining the array of implements spread before him. There lay a set of metal stamps, each with a circular head, and beside them a tray of small bottles, droppers, corked and labelled in a neat, clerkly hand. One bore a faint, reddish stain upon its rim. "I am concerned with the matter of your traps," said Holmes lightly. "A gentleman was seen backstage this morning, curious about bluing powder and carpenter's chalk. He's now dead, within a stone's throw of Baker Street. You will understand, therefore, why I wish to learn who had cause to meddle with your equipment last night." Clegg's round face stiffened. "Dead, you say? Well, we get all sorts here, stage-door loafers, fellows trying to sell dodges or medicines, but if he touched my gear, I never saw him. We keep a close hand on strangers." Holmes picked up one of the metal stamps. It was a small iron disc, fitted with a wooden handle, its underside bearing a circular boss. "These are used for pressing impressions into softwood or plaster props," Clegg explained, "or for heating when we need a scorch mark for effect. Mind your fingers, they hold the heat." "Indeed," murmured Holmes. He turned the tool in his hand, then gently set it down again. "A scorch mark on cloth precisely circular, no wider than a coin, would be within its powers, I think." The property master gave him a sharp look. "You're suggesting one of my irons was used upon your dead man? That's monstrous. They never leave this bench unless in my hand." Holmes merely smiled. "The world is full of hands, my dear sir, many of them sticky. Now these bottles, your droppers, what liquids are employed in your trade?" Clegg shrugged uneasily. "All harmless enough. Vinegar to dull gilt, ink to stain ropes, a touch of sulphur for smell. The actors like their illusions vivid. I keep them labelled." Holmes's long fingers plucked one bottle from the tray, sniffed it, and replaced it with a nod. "I detect soap and carbolic faintly overlaying it. Odd that an actor should require cleanliness so punctilious. Yet a man who followed our victim from this very stage was traced to a chemist's for that precise purchase." Clegg frowned. "You'll not put it at my door, sir? I've managed these props 20 years and never had the yard at my bench before." "Nor shall you now," said Holmes smoothly. "You will oblige me with a list of those who had access here last night, actors, workmen, scene-shifters, and I promise your irons and droppers shall remain innocent until proved otherwise." The man sighed and scribbled a few names upon a scrap. Holmes pocketed it, then walked slowly toward the wings, his gaze roving over ropes, flats, and painted backdrops. I followed, increasingly puzzled. At length he stopped by a narrow stair, the one leading down beneath the stage. He stooped to examine the grain of the wood. See here, Watson, blue dust upon the tread where our sandy-haired friend paused, and deeper the print of another shoe, impressed beside his. The latter's edge is sharper, fresh leather, I think, and see the faint groove across the heel? A strap was buckled tight about it. I have seen such grooves upon the boots of men who wear stage harness, those contraptions for flying villains across the stage. He rose, brushing his fingers together. We are hunting, my dear Watson, a villain who knows every inch of these boards, who handles heated irons and chemical droppers as part of his daily bread, and who shadows a desperate man to silence him. He is of the theatre as surely as that curtain is of velvet. But the dead man? I asked. What brought him here at all? Why the pawned locket, the frantic inquiries, the scrawled half-message that ended in your very name? That, said Holmes with a gleam, is the question upon which all else hinges. He held a secret tied to this theatre, perhaps in the very locket he pawned. That secret was of weight enough to merit pursuit, enough to merit death. We must know what was within it. He turned sharply. Come, to Marylebone Road, to the pawnbroker's. We must secure the description of the pledged article before some unseen hand redeems it. Lestrade will have sent word, but I prefer my own eyes upon such matters. We quitted the theatre, the fog wreathing once more about us, though thinner now as the morning advanced. The pawnbroker's shop was a mean little place, its window crowded with violins, watches, and oddments. The proprietor, a weasel-faced man with spectacles, produced his ledger after a word from Holmes. "There it is," Holmes said quietly, pointing. "Silver locket, oval, with chased border. No inscription on the case, but here, a note of contents, a miniature portrait, and a folded slip of paper. No names given." The pawnbroker pursed his lips. "It was pledged by a nervous sort, sandy hair, last night about 8:30. Paid 2 shillings on it. Said he'd be back today." Holmes's fingers drummed upon the counter. "He will not, poor fellow. Has anyone sought to redeem it this morning?" The man nodded reluctantly. "Indeed, sir. A gentleman, muffled up, came near 10. Described the locket to a nicety. I told him it was pledged, and he pressed me hard to know when the ticket would be claimed. I would not tell him." Holmes' eyes flashed. "That was wise. The article remains here." The pawnbroker produced a small packet from the strong box. Holmes opened it carefully. The locket was plain enough, but within lay a miniature of a woman, dark-eyed, handsome, with a resolute mouth, and, folded small, a slip of paper. Holmes unfolded it, and I saw, written in a cramped hand, a name and a Nicene address. Ellen March, 12 Brook Street, Deptford. Holmes replaced both with the utmost care, returned the packet, and thanked the man with a courtesy that startled him. Outside, he pressed my arm. "Watson, we hold at last the thread. Ellen March, her name, the key, her portrait, the lure. Our sandy-haired victim risked pawning it, perhaps to raise money to bring it to me, perhaps to shield it from his pursuer." He scrawled his message to point me toward himself. "Haunts Baker," or "wants Baker." But death overtook him before the last stroke of the pen. The locket was what his killer feared. And now we know where the lady may be found. His voice dropped to that quiet, dangerous note I had heard before the spring of many a trap. "This evening, Watson, we shall pay a call upon Brook Street, but before that we must stir our inspector to hold a net round Drury Lane, for I suspect the stage harbours not one false sailor, but a murderer." I could not resist a shiver, though the fog had thinned. The image of the dead man, the faint bruise beneath his ear, the hidden locket, and the name of a woman waiting unknowing in Deptford combined into a shadow heavier than the mist. Yet Holmes strode on, eager, as if the game, far from daunted by death, had only now begun. Holmes wasted no time in returning to Baker Street. Once there, he seated himself cross-legged in his armchair, laced his fingers, and stared at the ceiling with that inward expression which told me he was arranging the sequence of events in his mind as a musician might rehearse a score. The locket and its contents, the theatre, the bruise upon the dead man's neck, all seemed to gather and crystallize beneath his gaze. For nearly half an hour I refrained from speech, contenting myself with lighting my pipe and watching the shifting play of thought across his features. At last he stirred, his eyes glittering with decision. "Watson, the locket is the fulcrum," he said. "The miniature is not merely a trinket but an anchor of identity, and the folded paper is a signpost. Whoever Ellen March may be, she is the centre toward which this wheel of intrigue turns. We must see her before the evening grows old. But the visit must be arranged with care. Our adversary is clever enough to shadow and silence a man in a fog-bound cab. We must anticipate that same vigilance around Brook Street." He rose and pulled a drawer from the escritoire, producing a small case containing his assortment of disguises. Selecting a shabby muffler and a workman's cap, he tried them against the mirror. "Tonight I shall be a docker from the wharves, with you as my brother newly returned from India, lame of leg and seeking employment on the river. A story simple enough to deflect suspicion, and plausible enough to gain admission. Ellen March may be wary of strangers. Better to present ourselves as men who share her world, rather than to confront her with the austere title of consulting detective." Before I could reply, a sharp knock came upon the door. Lestrade entered, his face flushed with exertion and his coat spattered with fog damp. He carried a small notebook, which he thrust open upon the table. "Mr. Holmes, we have traced the dead man's identity," said he. "Name of Robert Enfield, a clerk employed in a shipping office near the docks, lodged at a cheap house off Tottenham Court Road. His landlady speaks of debts, a habit of wandering to the theatre, and a lady he often named but never brought home, Ellen March." Holmes inclined his head. "Then the circle tightens. Did you find aught concerning the locket?" "Only that he prized it highly," replied Lestrade. He was seen staring at it often. The pawn was out of desperation. His pockets were near empty. And another thing, one of my men at Drury Lane swears he saw Enfield in conversation with a stagehand yesterday afternoon. The fellow slipped him a folded paper. "We are seeking the man now." Holmes's eyes glowed. "Excellent, Inspector. Guard well the pawnbroker's shop. The muffled stranger will return. If he succeeds in reclaiming the locket, we lose the one tangible thread. But above all, send a discreet man to keep watch upon Brook Street, Deptford. If Ellen March is in peril, she must not be left unprotected." Lestrade assented and took his leave, though not without a muttered comment that Holmes seemed ever a step ahead of the yard. When the door closed, Holmes paced the carpet in long strides. "Observe, Watson, the outline grows clearer. Enfield was a clerk with access to shipping ledgers, dry documents, but often holding secrets of immense value. Suppose he discovered such a secret, one that touched upon certain transactions and sought to sell or expose it. He confides in a woman, Ellen March, perhaps with more courage than discretion. The locket becomes both keepsake and hiding place. A rival hand learns of it, one with influence in the theatre, for that is the scene upon which all threads converge. Enfield attempts to reach me, is followed and silenced." "But why the theatre?" I asked. "Why should actors and carpenters be entangled in such a business?" "Because the theatre is London's best disguise," Holmes answered. "Behind its painted scenes one may hide powders, papers, even persons. A trapdoor swallows a man as quickly as any grave, and those who move its ropes and pulleys are skilled in shadows and swift effects. Murder may be masked as easily as melodrama." The afternoon waned, and at dusk we set out for Deptford, in our assumed guises. The fog had lifted, giving way to a damp chill that crept into the bones. We found Brook Street to be a narrow lane of shabby houses, their windows aglow with the faint light of oil lamps. At number 12, a modest dwelling with a broken railing before the step, Holmes rapped thrice in a docker's fashion. The door was opened by a young woman whose features, though tired, bore the unmistakable likeness of the miniature. Her dark eyes searched our faces with guarded suspicion. "Miss March?" Holmes inquired, softening his voice into the rough burr of a workman. "We come on business touching the late Robert Enfield. May we speak within—" At the mention of Enfield, her composure wavered. She drew us quickly inside, fastening the door behind us. The room was small and poorly furnished, but neat. A single candle flickered upon the table, casting her face into a chiaroscuro of grief and defiance. "You knew him?" she whispered. "Tell me, have they harmed him? I feared it. He was watched. He said so again and again. He would not sleep, would not eat. Always that locket in his hand." Holmes laid aside his cap, speaking now in his natural tones. "Miss March, I am Sherlock Holmes. Robert Enfield did indeed come to harm. He died this morning, struck down by a subtle hand, within sight of my own door. But you must be brave. If you love his memory, you must help me trace the cause." She covered her face with her hands, stifling a sob. When she looked up, her expression was resolute. "He trusted me, Mr. Holmes. He said he had found a record, a list of names and shipments that would ruin certain men if it were known. He feared they would kill him. He begged me to keep the locket safe. Inside it he placed the address of this house, so that if he fell, someone might still reach me. He meant to bring it to you, but he was too late." Holmes listened intently, then asked, "These names, did he ever show them to you?" "No. He said the less I knew, the safer I would be. But I saw a slip of paper once, tucked in the locket with my picture. He told me if anything befell him, that paper would speak." "Then, the locket is indeed the key," Holmes murmured. "Miss March, your life is in peril. The men who killed Enfield will not hesitate to silence you. You must not remain here alone tonight." She paled, but nodded. "Where shall I go?" "To a place where the law can guard you," Holmes said. "Inspector Lestrade will arrange safe quarters until this matter is resolved." I stepped to the window and drew the curtain aside. Across the narrow street, in the shadow of a doorway, a figure stood quite still, muffled in a heavy coat. Even in the dim light I could see the glint of eyes fixed upon the house. I whispered urgently to Holmes. He moved to my side, glanced once, and smiled grimly. "Our adversary wastes no time. Already they mark her door." "Very well, Watson. The stage is set. The curtain shall rise sooner than they think." Holmes turned swiftly back to Miss March, his voice brisk yet kind. "Gather what you need for a night's absence. We leave at once, and silently, for if they think to shadow us, they shall find themselves following not the prey, but the snare." Miss March obeyed without protest. She rose, gathered a small parcel of belongings with trembling fingers, and extinguished the candle so that the room lay in darkness save for the faint glow from the street. Holmes opened the door with infinite care, his eyes darting swiftly to the shadowed figure across the way. The man had not moved. He might have been a statue planted in the fog. Holmes's hand touched my sleeve. "Watson, you will walk with Miss March close to her side. Keep to the middle of the street. Our watcher expects stealth. We shall disarm him with openness. I will follow a few paces behind and see what trail he chooses to take. If he draws too near, I shall contrive a diversion." We stepped into the damp air. Miss March's arm trembled as it rested in mine, yet she held her head high with a courage that stirred my admiration. We walked slowly toward the end of Brook Street, Behind us, the figure detached itself from the wall and began to follow at a measured distance. Holmes, falling farther behind, appeared to vanish into the haze. I had no doubt he had melted into some shadowed court, keeping his quarry in view. At the main road, a cab stood waiting, its driver muffled against the chill. Holmes reappeared from nowhere, guiding us swiftly to it. He whispered to the driver, then handed Miss March inside. As I joined her, Holmes leaned close. "Remain calm. We go to Scotland Yard, but by a winding road. Our friend will follow, and in doing so, show us more than he intends." The cab lurched into motion. I peered back and glimpsed the silhouette of another hansom setting off after us. Holmes sat opposite, his eyes bright, every nerve alert. We twisted through the narrow lanes of Deptford, doubling and redoubling, yet always the pursuing cab reappeared behind us. At length Holmes tapped upon the roof, and we drew up outside a public house at the corner of a busy market. The street was lively despite the hour. Hawkers cried their wares, costermongers shouted, and the press of people offered cover for a dozen stratagems. Holmes alighted first, assisted Miss March, and then signalled me to linger by her side. He strolled slowly down the market, his tall figure blending with the crowd. Our pursuer, abandoning subtlety, descended from his cab and followed after him. It was then that Holmes wheeled suddenly into a narrow alley, and the man quickened his pace to keep up. I confess my heart leapt with alarm, but Holmes had calculated the moment with perfect precision. For as the stranger entered the alley, a second figure stepped from the shadows and barred his way. Inspector Lestrade, with 2 constables at his back. The muffled man gave a cry of rage and attempted to bolt, but Holmes was upon him instantly, his wiry strength pinning the fellow's arm while the police closed in. Within moments he was disarmed of a small vial and a curious metal tool shaped like a miniature stamp, its surface darkened by recent heat. "You will not scorch another throat with this," Holmes said coldly, handing the object to Lestrade. "Take him to the yard. We shall examine both him and his instrument more closely there." Miss March, pale but composed, whispered, "Is he the one who killed Robert?" Holmes glanced at the captive, whose sullen eyes burned with malice. "He is the hand, madam. Whether he is also the brain we shall soon determine." We drove at once to Scotland Yard, where Miss March was entrusted to the care of a matron and given a room for the night. Holmes and I, with Lestrade, descended to the charge-room where the prisoner was searched. His pockets yielded little, a watch, a clasp-knife, a few coins, but the small vial contained a colourless liquid that emitted a faintly sweet odour. Holmes unstopped it, wafted the scent toward himself, and nodded grimly. "Hydrocyanic acid, Inspector, in a diluted form. Applied by dropper to the heated boss of that stamp, it would cause a blister upon contact with the skin and admit the poison directly to the blood, a swift, silent, and most deadly device. The bruise on Enfield's neck is explained." Lestrade whistled. "And this fellow carried it about as though it were a box of matches. But who is he?" The prisoner, at first, refused his name, but under pressure he gave it as Stephen Venn, the very scene painter we had heard mentioned. He maintained a stony silence beyond that, though his defiant sneer betrayed no remorse. Holmes regarded him with cool detachment. "You will find, Inspector, that this man is but a subordinate. He is clever with his hands, adept with paint and powder, but he lacks the breadth for such orchestration. No, behind him stands another, someone who feared Enfield's knowledge of certain shipping matters and who employed this creature to still his tongue." We left the prisoner in custody and repaired to Holmes's rooms to review the case. Miss March had been provided temporary refuge, but Holmes insisted she remain under guard until the affair was settled. As the fire crackled in our sitting room, he spread before him the fragments we had gathered, the pawn ticket, the theatre bills, the scrap of the trapdoor plan, and the notes from the pawnbroker and the chemist. "Consider, Watson," said he, "the convergence of all threads upon the theatre. Enfield, a shipping clerk, discovers irregularities in the books, smuggling perhaps, or illicit cargo concealed among legitimate goods. He confides in Ellen March, the one soul he trusts. Realizing his danger, he seeks to reach me. But why the theatre? Because those controlling the smuggling ring use the stage as a cover for their operations. Crates marked for scenery may conceal other things. Enfield, by chance or inquiry, stumbled upon this, perhaps through his acquaintance with Venn. That scrap of a trapdoor plan points to a hiding place beneath the stage. And so he tried to bring the matter to you, I said, but was pursued and silenced before he could speak. Precisely. Our task now is to unmask the master behind the curtain. Venn will not tell us. He is too hardened or too frightened. But tomorrow we shall return to Drury Lane, not as visitors, but as intruders in the night. I must see what lies beneath that trap." He sat back, his eyes gleaming with the cold light I knew so well. "There is danger ahead, Watson, for our quarry plays boldly, yet I feel the lines tightening. Another turn, and we shall see the face behind the mask." I slept but little that night, for the images of the dead clerk, the locket, and the shadowed stage haunted my thoughts. Yet when dawn came and Holmes stood ready, calm and eager, I felt that peculiar thrill which always seized me at the brink of one of his adventures. The mystery darkened, yet with Holmes at my side I knew the way, though perilous, would lead at last to the truth. The following evening found Holmes and me making our way once more toward Drury Lane. The day had been spent in restless preparation, for Holmes had insisted upon quiet until the house was dark. He moved with a suppressed energy that betrayed his eagerness. More than once he drew out the envelope containing the scrap of the trap-door plan, studying its faint pencil lines as though he expected them to rearrange themselves into words. When at last twilight deepened and the city lamps flared to life, he sprang up with the air of a man released from chains. "Watson, we must see beneath that stage tonight. The performance will draw the attention of the crowd above, while backstage the movement of carpenters and scene-shifters will mask our own. Bring your revolver, for the hand that struck Enfield once may strike again." We arrived at the theatre just as the gaslights were blazing in the great chandeliers and the queue of patrons wound down the street. Holmes had secured entry through the side door, using a pretext that seemed second nature to him. Within moments, we were among the dim corridors and cluttered storerooms that lay behind the glitter of the stage. The muffled throb of the orchestra reached us faintly, while shouts and laughter echoed from the pit. Holmes moved with the ease of one who knew the terrain already, weaving past ropes and painted flats until we reached the narrow stair leading down beneath the boards. The air grew colder as we descended. At the bottom lay a low-ceilinged chamber filled with timbers, pulleys, and counterweights. A faint glow came from a lantern hung on a nail, and in that half-light I saw the chalked rectangle upon the floorboards above us, the same as in Enfield's drawing. Holmes knelt and pressed his hand to the planks. With a faint creak, they yielded upward, revealing a square aperture. "Here is the trap," he whispered. "And see, fresh scratches upon the hinge, as though used more than the play requires. Let us look further." He drew the lantern closer, casting a pale circle of light. Beneath the trap a cavity had been fashioned, little more than a pit, between the joists, yet large enough to conceal a stout chest. The lid of such a box protruded faintly, its brass corner gleaming in the lantern glow. Holmes's eyes shone with triumph. "Contraband, Watson. I would wager these men have used the theatre as a depot. The applause above masks the creak of pulleys below. Smuggling thrives best when no one suspects it." I stooped to examine the chest. It was stoutly built and secured by a padlock of unusual size. Holmes produced from his pocket a small collection of picks, and with the delicacy of a surgeon applying an instrument, he worked at the lock. After a tense minute, there came a click, and the lid rose slowly. Inside lay not jewels or coin, but bundles of papers bound with cord, together with several packets wrapped in oilskin. Holmes lifted one bundle, untied it, and spread the contents upon the floor. They were shipping manifests, carefully copied, each bearing the stamp of a London line. Yet across many pages ran a second set of figures added in cipher, which Holmes studied with keen interest. "Observe, Watson, the true heart of the conspiracy. Enfield was a clerk in such an office. He must have seen these altered ledgers or suspected them and traced them here. These documents would ruin men of wealth and influence if exposed. Smuggling of opium, perhaps, or worse, arms destined for foreign ports." Small wonder he was silenced. Even as he spoke, the sound of footsteps echoed down the stair. Holmes extinguished the lantern in an instant, plunging us into darkness. We crouched behind a stack of scenery as two men entered, bearing another oilskin packet. Their voices were low, but distinct in the confined space. "Best get these stowed before morning," said one. "The inspector's men are sniffing about the docks. We'll keep them here till the next shipment clears." "And Venn?" asked the other. "In custody, curse him. He'll not talk, but it means we must tread more carefully." Holmes' hand gripped my arm. I felt rather than saw the silent command. We waited until the men had placed their burden into the chest and closed the lid once more. Then, as they turned, Holmes struck a match. The sudden flare lit his hawk-like profile. "Good evening, gentlemen," he said calmly. "You arrive most opportunely. May I inquire who commands this ingenious arrangement?" The effect was electric. One man sprang toward the stair, the other drew a knife. I was upon him in an instant, my revolver pressed against his ribs. Holmes, with a dexterity born of many such encounters, tripped the fleeing man and pinned him by the throat until his knife clattered away. In another moment both were secured, their curses muffled by the ropes Holmes bound about them. We relit the lantern and examined our captives. One was a burly fellow of the stage crew, his hands still stained with paint. The other, however, bore the unmistakable dress and manner of a gentleman, though dishevelled by our struggle. His features were aquiline, his moustache carefully waxed, but his eyes shifted with the quick, furtive glances of guilt. Holmes regarded him with icy disdain. "Here we have it, Watson, the master in person. A man of society who cloaks his operations beneath the guise of the theatre, using poor wretches like Enfield as pawns. This, I fancy, is the true architect of the smuggling ring." The gentleman sneered. "You'll prove nothing. Those papers are worthless without names." Holmes's smile was thin. "Names, sir, are the one commodity you cannot conceal. Enfield died for them, but the locket has preserved the chain. You shall find that Scotland Yard has a way of loosening even the tightest tongue." We brought our captives to the yard before dawn, and Lestrade received them with astonishment not unmixed with admiration. Holmes laid the papers upon the inspector's desk, together with the vial and the heated stamp recovered from Venn. "There lies your case, Inspector, a ring of smugglers using the stage to mask their trade, the murdered clerk who sought to expose them, the weapon of his destruction, and the lady who holds the key to his trust. Guard her well, for her testimony will seal their fate." Lestrade, with a rare warmth, shook Holmes by the hand. "Mr. Holmes, I'll not deny you've outstripped us once again, but you've given us the means to strike a heavy blow. When at last we returned to Baker Street, the sun was rising over the misty roofs of London. Holmes sank into his chair, lit his pipe, and exhaled a thin stream of smoke. His eyes softened, though the fire of triumph still burned within them. "Watson," said he, "you see how a locket, a smudge of blue dust, and a theatre bill can draw a net round men who thought themselves secure. Yet it was no brilliance of mine, only the inexorable logic of detail. Poor Enfield saw enough to endanger him, but not enough to protect himself. It is for us to finish the work he began." I could not but marvel at him. The fog of London still clung to the streets, yet within the quiet of our rooms the mysteries seemed already to disperse beneath the clarity of his mind. Holmes did not allow himself the luxury of repose for long, though dawn glowed weakly through the curtains and my body yearned for sleep. His mind was alight with fresh calculations. He leaned forward in his chair, pipe clenched between his teeth, and tapped the bundle of seized papers as though the rhythm might unlock their cipher. "These," he said, "are more than smuggling manifests. They are keys to an enterprise of such scope that Enfield's death is but a single note in its score. Look here, Watson, the visible entries concern crates of scenery, costumes, and stage properties. But beside them, in a second hand, appear figures in cipher. By simple substitution I can already trace their meaning. Each number corresponds not to goods, but to ships' berths and departure dates. Observe, this 41 denotes a berth at the East India Docks. C3 is a wharf at Deptford. The smugglers have used the stage not merely as storage, but as a calendar for their illicit exports." I bent over the sheets, struggling to follow his swift deductions. Then Enfield must have stumbled upon this cipher in his office work, recognized the irregularities, and tried to bring them to you. It cost him his life. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. But the greater mystery remains. Who among London's respectable faces sits atop this pyramid? The gentleman we seized beneath the trap may be a directing hand, but he is not the summit. His desperation betrayed him. The true author of this enterprise is yet concealed." Before I could reply, a knock came at the door, and Lestrade entered, with the brisk energy of a man long accustomed to sleepless vigils. He carried a telegram which he laid before Holmes. "It's as you predicted," said he. "The man we caught is a minor baronet, Sir Wilfrid Ewart, though heavily in debt. He owns shares in a shipping line and has acquaintances in every theatrical circle. The Yard will make much of this arrest. Yet," and here Lestrade hesitated, "you believe, do you not, that he is only a figurehead?" Holmes glanced at the telegram and gave a short laugh. "Sir Wilfrid possesses neither the intellect nor the courage to orchestrate such a scheme. He is a useful mask, but not the mind. Press him hard, Inspector, and he may yield the name of his patron. Meanwhile, we must protect Miss March. She is the only witness who may confirm Enfield's fears and connect the cipher to living men." Lestrade nodded. "She remains under guard, but she is frightened. The fellow tried once to silence her. He may try again." Holmes rose and took his coat. "Then we shall go to her, for the enemy, cornered, is at his most dangerous, and I would wager, Watson, that tonight will see their boldest move yet." The day wore on with heavy skies and the promise of rain. We dined early, and by dusk we were once more in Deptford, where Miss March had been lodged in a discreet house under police watch. She greeted us with a composure that belied the strain upon her. Her dark eyes met Holmes's steadily, though her hands twisted the kerchief in her lap. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "I have thought of nothing but Robert since you last left. If his death is to bring justice, I will speak whatever truth I know." Holmes inclined his head gravely. Courage such as yours, madam, will do him honour. Tell me, had Enfield any suspicion of who within the shipping office betrayed him?" She hesitated. "He once mentioned a superior, a man of charm, well liked in society, who dabbled in the theatre. He said this man's smile was like a curtain that concealed the stage behind. He would not give the name for fear I should be endangered. But he swore it was someone of consequence." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "That is enough. Your testimony may confirm the threads we have begun to draw. But I must insist, Miss March, that you remain within this house tonight. The yard has placed men at each corner. Should any attempt be made upon you, the trap will spring." Even as he spoke, the faint crunch of carriage wheels sounded outside, halting too abruptly for chance. Holmes crossed swiftly to the window, drawing the curtain by a finger's breadth. His lips tightened. "A brougham, Watson, unlit and drawn up opposite. Its occupants lurk rather than wait. This is no friendly visitor." Lestrade, who had accompanied us, signalled to one of his men. The constable slipped into the shadows. Minutes passed. Then came a sudden cry, the scuffle of boots, and the unmistakable crack of a pistol. We rushed out into the night. The constable lay upon the pavement, his arm grazed by a bullet, while the brougham clattered away into the fog. Holmes sprang forward with the speed of a greyhound, and I after him. We pursued down twisting lanes through the gaslit mist until the carriage swung abruptly into a narrow alley where its wheels stuck fast against a post. Two men leapt down and fled on foot. Holmes gave chase to the nearer, while I ran after the second, my revolver drawn. It was a desperate pursuit. My quarry darted into a yard stacked with timber, doubling back and forth with the agility of a fox. At last I cornered him against a wall and fired a warning shot into the air. He halted, hands raised, and I recognized him as one of the stage crew from Drury Lane, his face pale with terror. Holmes returned shortly, his own prisoner in tow, a man whose cloak and hat marked him as no labourer, but a gentleman. The lamplight fell across his face, and I started. It was none other than the manager of the shipping company where Enfield had worked, a man whose name had appeared often in the financial papers as a figure of trust. Holmes's voice was quiet but implacable. "At last, Watson, the veil is lifted. Here is the true master of the ring. Sir Wilfrid was but his puppet. Enfield's discovery pointed straight to him, and so he set his hounds upon the poor clerk. He will not escape now." We marched the captives back to the guarded house, where Lestrade received them with grim satisfaction. Miss March, pale but resolute, looked upon the manager with mingled grief and triumph. "That is the man Robert feared," she whispered, "the man whose smile concealed everything." Holmes bowed his head to her. "Then Robert Enfield has not died in vain. His courage, joined to yours, has torn away the mask." It was late when we returned once more to Baker Street. Holmes flung himself into his chair with the weary satisfaction of a man whose hunt draws near its end. He filled his pipe, and the smoke curled upward in delicate spirals. "Watson," he said, "we stand at the brink of revelation. Tomorrow, with the papers decrypted and the prisoners confronted, the entire edifice will collapse. Yet even now I feel there is one thread left untied, some element unseen, some shadow still lurking. When it appears, the pattern will be complete. Until then, we must wait and watch." His eyes gleamed through the smoke, and I knew the case was not yet finished, though its climax approached with irresistible certainty. The night's pursuit had ended in triumph, yet Holmes's words lingered in my mind as we sat again in the quiet of Baker Street. The lamps burned low, the fire hissed faintly, and outside the rain ticked upon the panes. Holmes smoked in silence, his eyes fixed not upon the flames, but upon the unfathomed distance of his own thoughts. I confess that fatigue pressed upon me, and I urged him to seek his bed, but he shook his head. "There is still a gap, Watson," said he at last. "The ciphered papers, the smuggling, the baronet, the manager, all these fit well enough. Yet the detail of the locket still evades us. Why should Enfield place Miss March's likeness and her address together in that trinket? It was no sentimental act alone. He sought to leave a message, one deeper than affection. And that message, I fear, has not yet been read." I protested that the address had guided us to Miss March, and surely that was its purpose. Holmes's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "You are a faithful recorder, Watson, but your imagination lags. Enfield could have written her name plainly in a letter. He instead chose concealment within a locket, a hiding place so intimate it might pass unnoticed. Why such care unless the locket held more than it seemed? I rose and brought down the small, strong box in which Holmes had placed the recovered trinket. He opened it with a delicate touch and laid the silver oval upon the table. He examined it long, turning it beneath the lamplight, tapping its rim with a fingernail, then pressing his glass to its surface. Suddenly his eyes kindled. "Ah, do you see, Watson? The back is double. A clever join conceals a second recess. Fetch me the thin blade from the drawer." I obeyed, and with surgeon's precision, Holmes prized open the false back. Within, folded to the size of a postage stamp, lay another slip of paper. He unfolded it with care, and we both bent over it. It contained not words, but figures, long columns of numbers interspersed with cryptic marks. Holmes's face grew intent. "This, Watson, is the true secret Enfield died to protect. It is the key to the ciphered manifests. With this, the hidden shipments may be traced beyond dispute. Enfield left it here, knowing that if he perished, Ellen March would bring it to me. He was silenced before he could finish his message, but the locket spoke in his stead. At that instant, a hurried step sounded upon the stair, followed by Lestrade's sharp knock. He entered, hat dripping with rain, his countenance troubled. "Holmes," said he, "there has been an attempt upon Miss March. A shot fired through the window not half an hour ago. She is unhurt, but shaken. My men gave chase, but lost the villain in the maze of alleys." Holmes' brows drew together. "Then the enemy remains unbroken. He fears that she may reveal more than she knows. This proves the importance of what we hold." He showed Lestrade the slip from the locket. The inspector whistled low. "Then we have them by the throat. With this we can prove the case in court." Holmes shook his head. "Not yet, for though the papers are damning, the true architect still walks free. Sir Wilfrid was but a debtor pressed into service, the manager but a tool. There remains a hand more cunning, one who moves unseen while others act. Until that man is named, Miss March is in peril, and the conspiracy alive." We agreed to meet at Scotland Yard the following morning. Holmes spent what remained of the night poring over the figures, scribbling notes, muttering to himself. At dawn, pale and drawn, but triumphant, he tossed the sheets aside. "The code is broken," he declared. "Each figure corresponds to a vessel and consignment. And here, observe this sequence, repeats across multiple entries. It signifies the hand that authorized them all. The initials are cunningly disguised, but not beyond recognition. They point to a man of rank, one whose reputation for philanthropy shields him from suspicion. Yet his fortune was built upon the seas, and he has not abandoned the taste. Watson, we hunt no lesser quarry than Lord Ravenshaw." I started at the name, for it was well known in society as that of a patron of the arts, a nobleman whose donations graced hospitals and galleries. To link him with murder and smuggling seemed monstrous, but Holmes's eyes were ablaze with certainty. "That is why, Watson," Enfield trembled. He knew that to accuse such a man was to fling a stone at a fortress. He hesitated, and death overtook him. But the fortress has a crack, and through it the truth will shine. Today we must strike. At Scotland Yard, Holmes laid his evidence before Lestrade, who listened with growing amazement. "Ravenshaw!" he exclaimed. "Why, he sits in the House of Lords. To arrest him would be to shake half London." Holmes's gaze was cold. "Better that than to leave the city's arteries poisoned. You will have your warrant soon enough, but first allow me to draw him into the open. He must betray himself, and for that I have a plan." That evening, Holmes disguised himself once more, this time as a messenger bearing urgent papers. We drove together to the Ravenshaw residence, a grand house overlooking the river. Holmes left me in the cab with instructions to wait for his signal. He entered boldly, was admitted by the butler, and disappeared within. I confess the minutes that followed weighed heavily. At last the curtains of an upper window stirred, and I glimpsed Holmes's hand. I leapt from the cab and hurried to the side door he had indicated. Inside I found him standing in a richly furnished study, confronting Lord Ravenshaw himself. The nobleman's face, handsome and proud, was drained of colour. Upon the desk lay the slip from the locket and the ciphered manifests. "You see, my lord," Holmes was saying, "that the trail ends here. Enfield died because he carried this key. Your hirelings failed to recover it. And now the Yard holds your accomplices." Ravenshaw's hand trembled toward a drawer, but Holmes's voice cracked like a whip. "Do not touch it. My colleague's revolver covers you even now." I stepped forward, and the peer's composure shattered. He sank into his chair, his features contorted with rage and despair. "You meddling hound," he spat. "Do you know what power you dare assail? I could have raised you high, yet you drag me down." Holmes's face was iron. "I stand for truth, my lord, and for the memory of Robert Enfield, whose courage outweighed your titles. The law shall deal with you." At that moment Lestrade and his men, waiting below by arrangement, burst in and took the nobleman into custody. His protestations echoed down the marble hall, but the net had closed. As we left, Holmes murmured, "Thus falls the mask. Yet I tell you, Watson, it was not the grandeur of his house nor the glitter of his name that troubled me, but the thought that a man may smile in the limelight while the darkest commerce thrives behind the curtain." I looked upon him with renewed wonder, knowing the case neared its climax, and that Holmes alone could have brought light into such shadows. Lord Ravenshaw's arrest sent ripples through every circle of London, from the humblest newsboy to the smoking rooms of the aristocracy. The morning papers trumpeted the scandal in heavy type, though much was couched in veiled language. A peer implicated in a vast conspiracy read one headline, while another hinted at grave charges connected with the docks and the stage. Holmes, however, received the news with only a thin smile, as though the storm outside our rooms was but the logical echo of the thunderclap he himself had loosed. Yet for all the triumph, I sensed in him no ease. He paced the floor incessantly, fingers pressed together, brow furrowed. "Watson," he said more than once, "there is something in this affair that remains unresolved. Ravenshaw has fallen, yes, but I distrust the neatness of it." His face betrayed fury, not fear, when I confronted him. "That is the anger of a man cornered, but not the despair of one utterly unmasked. There is more, and it lurks still unseen." I ventured that perhaps pride alone accounted for his defiance, but Holmes shook his head. "Pride does not explain the shot through Miss March's window, fired after Ravenshaw's subordinates were already seized. That was the act of a hand yet free." And note this: Ravenshaw, when faced with the cipher, did not deny it, but neither did he admit it. He yielded because the weight of appearances was against him, but his silence spoke volumes. It was not he who devised the code. He served as patron, shield, financier perhaps, but the brain, Watson, the brain may yet escape us. This disquiet was deepened when Lestrade called later that day with unwelcome tidings. Ravenshaw, though secured at the yard, refused to answer questions. He demanded a solicitor of the highest standing, and already powerful friends whispered of influence to suppress proceedings. Worse still, one of the vital witnesses, the stagehand I had captured, was found insensible in his cell, poisoned by means unknown. He would never testify. Holmes listened grimly, his gaze fixed upon the fire. The web is larger than even I thought. Someone moves with precision still, cutting each strand that might entangle him. Ravenshaw is sacrificed like a piece upon a chessboard, but the unseen player directs the game. That night, Holmes was restless. He laid out once more the objects collected, the locket with its secret slip, the ciphered manifests, the theatre bill, the scorched iron stamp. He examined each with renewed care, as though they might yield a different meaning under sleepless eyes. At last he struck his palm upon the table. "Watson, I have been blind. The locket was indeed meant for me, but not solely to convey the cipher key. Enfield placed Ellen March's address there as a decoy, trusting that the pursuers would fix their eyes upon her, while the true clue lay beneath the false back. He meant to protect her by drawing the fire upon himself. And in that, alas, he succeeded too well." I asked him what this implied, but he would only say, "It implies that the true master of this affair has not yet shown his face. Ravenshaw is but the curtain. Behind it stands the playwright who penned the piece. Tomorrow we must return once more to Drury Lane, for the stage hides secrets we have not yet unearthed." With that resolution, he at last sought a few hours' rest. At noon the following day, we were again at the theatre. The bustle of carpenters, costumers, and actors seemed unchanged, yet I could not look upon the painted flats and ropes without recalling the deadly drama played out beneath. Holmes moved swiftly, questioning this man and that, his gaze darting to every corner. At last he drew me toward the manager's office, now deserted and dusty under police seal. He pushed past the tape with his usual disregard and began rifling the drawers. In one, beneath a sheaf of accounts, he discovered a narrow ledger bound in green leather. He opened it, and I saw his eyes gleam. Within were not stage expenses, but columns of figures and initials, written in the same hand as the cipher upon the manifests. He turned page after page, lips tightening. "Here is the missing link, Watson. Payments, coded, but transparent to a trained eye, made to dock officials, customs agents, even to men of the yard, and see, each entry initialed C. That, my dear fellow, is the hand behind it all." "See," I echoed. "But who?" Holmes snapped the book shut. "We shall know soon, for C is no common dock rat. The scale of these disbursements shows access to wealth and authority. This is the man Ravenshaw served, the one whose orders Venn obeyed, the shadow who fired through Miss March's window." Even as he spoke, a noise from the stage made us turn. A figure had entered silently, watching us with glittering eyes. It was the property master, Clegg, his bald head gleaming in the dim light. In his hand he held one of the heated irons, its end faintly glowing from a concealed lamp. "So, Mr. Holmes," he said softly, "you have found the ledger. I feared as much when you ferreted beneath the trap. You are clever, sir, but too curious for your own safety." He advanced a step, menace in every line of his squat figure. Holmes stood motionless, though his eyes never left the man's hand. "Clegg," said he, "or shall I say C? The stage manager was a puppet, Ravenshaw the figurehead, but you were the craftsman. You controlled the ropes, the pulleys, the traps. You paid the men, silenced Enfield, directed Venn. Even Ravenshaw danced upon your strings." The man gave a harsh laugh. "And so what if I did? Do you think the Yard will believe their patron saint of scenery, who built spectacles for half the theatres of London, is a criminal? No, Holmes. Better for you and your doctor friend to vanish here, a lamentable accident of stage machinery." He raised the iron, but in that instant Holmes sprang sideways, toppling the lantern and plunging the room into shadow. I drew my revolver, but the confusion was complete. Boards crashed, ropes swung, and Clegg's heavy boots thudded across the planks. Then came a sudden shout, and Lestrade, with 2 constables, burst through the doorway, summoned by Holmes's earlier foresight. The iron clattered to the ground, and Clegg was borne down in a flurry of oaths and struggling limbs. When at last the lamps were relit, Holmes stood calm once more, the ledger open in his hands. He regarded the captive with cold triumph. "The play is over, Clegg. The curtain has fallen, and the audience has seen the villain revealed. Ravenshaw may bear the shame before the world, but the law will not fail to name you as the true master of the stage, and Robert Enfield's ghost may rest at last." Clegg spat an oath, but his face was pale as chalk. The constables dragged him away, and silence fell upon the dusty boards. Holmes turned to me with a weary smile. "You see, Watson, why I spoke of an unseen hand. It was not in the salons of Mayfair, but in the workshops of the theatre that the mind of this enterprise lay. Now the last thread is tied, and tomorrow we shall see justice enacted." I nodded, marvelling as ever at his insight, and together we left the theatre, the ledger safe in Holmes' pocket, while outside the London fog closed round us like the final drop of the curtain. The capture of Clegg sent a wave of relief through me, for I believed the matter now complete. Yet Holmes, far from resting upon his triumph, grew more solemn than before. As we drove back through the dripping streets toward Baker Street, I ventured to congratulate him. He shook his head gravely, his thin lips scarcely stirring around the stem of his pipe. "You mistake, Watson," said he. "We have the ledger, the cipher, the locket, the villains in their chains, but the case is not yet sealed. I tell you, the danger is not gone." "But Clegg confessed himself in all but words," I protested. "Surely his hand arranged every thread." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes glittering in the dim light of the cab lamp. "Think, my dear fellow. Clegg is a craftsman. Wily, ruthless, yes, but he is not a statesman. The ledger shows sums that outstrip the purse of a property master, no matter how shrewd. He paid men in every quarter of London, bribed officials, procured safe harbours. Such rivers of gold cannot flow from his pocket alone. He is the engineer of detail, not the treasurer of empire. Someone higher still feeds the coffers." I was silenced, struck by the force of his reasoning, yet I clung to hope. At least Miss March is safe now. With Clegg in irons, there can be no further attempt upon her. Holmes' expression softened, but only a little. "Let us pray so. Yet the hand that sought her life may command others, still at liberty. We must tread carefully until the last stone is turned." The following morning we attended at Scotland Yard, where Lestrade, weary but exultant, reported that Clegg had at last broken under questioning. He had admitted to administering the fatal blow to Enfield by means of his infernal heated stamp. He confirmed that Ravenshaw had been drawn into the conspiracy through debt and vanity, but insisted he himself acted as principal in all else. "Yet mark you," said Lestrade, "he never named the source of his funds. Each time we pressed him, he shrugged and muttered of savings. Savings, forsooth! A fellow who lived hand to mouth these 20 years. Holmes, you are right. There's a greater rogue above him. But who? Holmes gave no direct answer. Instead, he asked for a private word with Miss March. She was brought into the inspector's office, pale but composed. Holmes bowed with a gentleness rare in him. "Miss March," he said, "you were close to Enfield. You knew his fears. Did he ever breathe a word, however slight, of a figure behind this conspiracy, a patron, a power whose name he dared not write?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she answered steadily. Once, and only once, he spoke of such a man. He called him the Voice. He said that orders came from nowhere, written or spoken, but all trembled to obey. He said the Voice could ruin a man in a night, or raise him just as quickly. That is all I know. Holmes inclined his head. "It is enough, thank you." When she had gone, I asked him eagerly what he made of it. He sat with his hands steepled, his gaze upon the window, where the rain beat steadily. "The Voice, Watson, a man unseen yet obeyed, that is the true adversary. And I think I begin to hear the timbre of that voice, though faintly. If my suspicions prove correct, the revelation will astound even you." That evening he was restless as a caged hawk. He prowled the sitting room, returning again and again to the ciphered manifests and the green ledger. At last he stopped abruptly. "Watson, do you recall the scrap of a stage plan found in Enfield's pocket, the oblong with its cross at the corner?" "Certainly," I said. "It marked the trap where the smuggling chest lay concealed." "Not only that," Holmes returned, his eyes flashing. "It was a warning. The cross was not placed at random, but at the very angle where the master might watch unseen. Enfield sought to tell me that the overseer was not upon the stage, nor below it, but above, aloft in the flies, where every rope and pulley is commanded. Think, Watson, who commands all from above, yet is never seen by the audience, the stage director, the manager of spectacle?" "But we seized the manager with Ravenshaw," I reminded him. "A manager in name only. He took orders, he did not give them. No, the Voice belongs to one who never shows his face, who employs others as screens. We must return again to Drury Lane, for there lies the final clue." I groaned inwardly, for the prospect of once more threading that sinister labyrinth chilled me. Yet I could not deny him. The next night found us again amidst the deserted theatre, guided by the custodian's lamp. Holmes moved with the air of a bloodhound upon the scent, leading me up a narrow stair to the loft above the stage. The flies stretched before us like a forest of beams and ropes, the darkness broken only by the glimmer of gas lamp far below. From here, every movement on stage might be directed unseen. Holmes crouched, examining the planks. "Here, Watson, dust disturbed. Footprints in the powder of lime. Someone watched from here last week, and not idly. See also this." He pointed to a small niche in the timber, where a ledger of smaller size lay hidden beneath a cloth. He drew it out and opened it with swift fingers. It contained columns of names, each with sums beside them. Names of actors, dock foremen, clerks, even constables. Bribes recorded with ruthless neatness. At the end of each page stood not the initial C, but the letter R. Holmes' eyes blazed. "Ravenshaw's ledger showed the mechanism. This shows the master. Do you see, Watson? The nobleman lent his name, the craftsman wielded his tool, but the Voice was a union of both. Ravenshaw financed, Clegg executed, but someone else directed, cloaked. Beneath the nobility's shadow, that man will be named before this is done." Even as he spoke, a board creaked behind us. We turned sharply. A tall figure stood framed against the gloom, his face hidden by the brim of a hat, his hand holding a pistol levelled at Holmes's breast. "You are clever, Mr. Holmes," came a cold, cultured voice, the very timbre of authority. "Clever, but too curious. You have prized open every lock save the one that guards your own life. This theatre has swallowed better men than in you." Holmes did not flinch. His gaze was steady, his voice calm. So the voice speaks at last. The pistol wavered for the briefest instant, then steadied again. The confrontation, I knew, had reached its most perilous moment, and the true heart of the mystery stood revealed before us. The pistol glinted faintly in the lamplight from below, its barrel unwavering save for the slight tremor that betrayed the strain of decision. The figure stepped forward, and as the brim of his hat lifted, I recognized at once the face of Lord Ravenshaw himself. Yet it was altered, hardened, as though the mask he had worn in society had been discarded for the true countenance beneath. "You were fool enough to think me merely a puppet," he said, his voice smooth and venomous. "Clegg was my tool, the manager my stooge, the clerks my scribes. I was the voice Holmes, and none suspected, a peer of the realm, benefactor of charities. Who would dream that the hand of London's darling guided the darker trade of the docks? You have prized too deeply into my secrets, and now you will be silenced." I confess my breath caught, for the distance was so slight that one twitch of his finger would have ended Holmes's career. Yet my companion, with that composure that has never deserted him in the most desperate straits, merely inclined his head and said, "Your scheme was bold, my lord, but boldness turns to folly when it forgets detail. Had you not written your own hand in cipher across the manifests, had you not marked your R upon the second ledger, I might still be groping in the dark. But the theatre betrays its master as surely as the stage betrays a false step." Ravenshaw's lips curled. "Clever to the last, yet words will not save you. Do you know how easy it would be to contrive your death here? A fall from the flies, tragic accident, consulting detective overreaches himself in curiosity. No one would question." Holmes gave the faintest smile. "Perhaps no one, save those who stand behind you even now." At that instant there was a rustle in the gloom. Two constables sprang from the shadows, revolvers levelled. Behind them appeared Lestrade, his square jaw set. Ravenshaw started, spun half round, and in that heartbeat of distraction Holmes darted forward with the swiftness of a striking hawk. His hand seized the pistol and wrenched it aside. The shot rang out, echoing through the rafters, and the bullet buried itself harmlessly in the timber. A moment later, Ravenshaw was borne to the floor, struggling like a netted animal, until the irons clicked upon his wrists. Holmes rose, dusting his hands. "I thought you might honour us with a soliloquy, my lord. Vanity has undone subtler villains than you. I arranged our audience accordingly." Lestrade looked both relieved and furious. "You might have given me more warning, Mr. Holmes. My heart will not stand many such surprises. But I cannot deny you have plucked the very heart from the mystery." Ravenshaw was led away, still defiant, his aristocratic features twisted with wrath. "Do you think you can ruin me? My name will not fall so easily. There are men who owe me their fortunes, who will never permit this." Holmes watched him go, his expression unreadable. "The higher they stand, the harder they fall, Watson," he murmured. "And it is not the strength of the fortress that matters, but the weakness of the stone in its foundation. We have found that stone." When at last we returned to Baker Street, the dawn was stealing over the housetops, pale and reluctant after a night of storm. I collapsed into my chair, exhausted, while Holmes paced the floor with the vigour of a man whose mind was still aflame. At length he sank into his armchair, stretched his long legs toward the fire, and spoke in the quiet, reflective tone he sometimes adopted when the chase was ended. Consider, Watson, how this case unfolded. A cab halted by chance before our very door, bearing a dead man who clutched only a torn theatre bill. That fragment, meaningless to all others, contained the germ of truth. From the smudge of blue dust on his boots, the bruise beneath his ear, and the pawned locket, we traced a path through fog and deception. False suspects arose, and for a time even I doubted whether the manager or Clegg stood at the centre. Yet step by step the pattern declared itself, until the voice could hide no longer. I could not restrain my admiration. "Holmes, you have unravelled a web that would have strangled the city itself. The courage, the foresight, it is unparalleled." He waved a hand almost impatiently. "Nonsense, Watson. It was but the patient application of method. Enfield's courage was greater than mine. He died for truth when he might have saved himself by silence. Ellen March, too, showed a bravery rare in any age. My part was only to fit their scattered pieces together." Nevertheless, as he spoke, I saw a glimmer of pride in his eyes. He leaned back, smoke curling from his pipe, and the room filled with that curious air of calm which follows storm. For my own part, I felt both relief and sorrow. Relief that the menace was quelled, sorrow that poor Enfield would never know the justice his sacrifice had purchased. Later that day, Miss March was brought to Baker Street under Lestrade's escort. She entered quietly, her mourning dress plain, her eyes still shadowed by grief. Holmes received her with unusual gentleness. "Madam," he said, "it is finished. The men who hunted Robert are in chains, their scheme laid bare. His name shall be cleared, and you may hold your head high." Tears glistened upon her cheeks, but she smiled faintly. "I thank you, Mr. Holmes. You have given his death meaning, and to me a measure of peace. I can never repay you." Holmes bowed slightly. "You repay me already by surviving where he would have wished you safe. It is all he desired." When she had gone, Lestrade, who had lingered awkwardly, turned to Holmes. "I'll not deny it. You've done the Yard a service that will echo for years. The newspapers will howl, Parliament will shake, but the law will hold. Ravenshaw's confession, coupled with the ledgers, is damning beyond repair." Holmes shrugged. "See that you guard the evidence well, Inspector. Men of power have many friends." With that he dismissed us all and retired to his violin. As the strains of a melancholy air filled the room, I reflected that the greatest triumphs of my friend were often shadowed by sadness. His mind rejoiced in the conquest of complexity, yet his heart, though he would never confess it, was touched by the human cost. That night, as I set down the notes of the case, I looked across at him where he sat, head bowed over the violin, lost in thought. "Holmes," I said softly, "will you ever cease to astonish me?" He lifted the bow with a faint smile. "My dear Watson, it is not I who astonish, but the world itself. I merely observe it." And with that he drew from the strings a final lingering chord, as though sealing the mystery with music, and letting the last shadows of Baker Street fade into silence. The trial of Lord Ravenshaw and his confederates stirred the nation like few scandals before it. The newspapers spared no ink in describing the downfall of a man once hailed as a benefactor of the poor, patron of the arts, and ornament of Parliament. The evidence Holmes had so carefully untangled, the ciphered manifests, the hidden ledgers, the infernal stamp of death, formed an iron chain from which even the most eloquent barrister could not free him. Ravenshaw stood revealed as the voice, the hidden hand behind a vast web of smuggling, bribery, and murder. His conviction sent shock through society, but also relief, for the cancer gnawing at London's heart had at last been cut away. Miss March gave her testimony with a courage that drew murmurs of admiration even in the crowded court. She spoke plainly of Enfield's fears and of his trust in Holmes. When she left the witness box, I saw Holmes incline his head to her with a respect deeper than words. She had survived the storm, and though her heart was scarred, her dignity remained unbroken. Clegg, the property master, confessed freely once Ravenshaw's guilt was laid bare. He admitted to acting as the nobleman's executioner, applying his craftsman's tools to silence the unfortunate clerk. Yet in the end, even he seemed relieved to have been unmasked, as though the strain of serving the voice had long since crushed his soul. When the case was concluded and the condemned awaited their fate, Holmes and I returned to Baker Street. I could not resist remarking upon the magnitude of his triumph. "My dear Holmes," I said, "you have plucked from the shadows a villain whose mask deceived all London. You have given justice to a poor clerk whose courage outweighed his station. Surely you must feel some pride in this victory." Holmes, who had been seated at the window watching the fog drift over the street, turned with a faint smile. "Pride, Watson, is a luxury ill-suited to one whose task is but to see clearly. I merely followed the thread where it led. Enfield laid down his life to place that thread in my hand. If I have done my part, it is only to honour his sacrifice." He lit his pipe and leaned back, the blue smoke wreathing about his sharp features. "It is curious, is it not, how the smallest detail, the scuff of blue dust upon a boot, the faint scorch upon his sleeve, can topple the proudest fortress. Men believe they hide their sins in vaults and ledgers, yet truth seeps out in motes of chalk and fragments of paper. It is detail, Watson, that betrays them, always detail." I could not but smile, for in that moment he seemed both philosopher and detective, his brilliance tempered by a melancholy that came only after the chase was won. I raised my glass to him. "To detail, then," I said, "and to Sherlock Holmes, who sees what others cannot." He waved the compliment aside, his eyes already drifting to the violin resting by the hearth. "Enough, Watson. The world will spin another riddle soon enough, and we must be ready, for crime, like the fog, never rests for long in London." And as he drew the bow across the strings, filling our rooms with a haunting melody, I felt once more that mingling of awe and gratitude which had accompanied me through so many adventures by his side. The murder that had begun with a dead man in a hansom cab had ended with the exposure of a peer of the realm, and through it all the genius of my friend had shone unerring. The city might sleep in uneasy peace, but in Baker Street there sat the sentinel of truth, ever watchful, ever ready, whose name would outlast the fog and shadows that haunted it.